child is doing. And we add meanings. We decide what that means. Oh, that child is doing that because. We make assumptions based on the meanings that we've added, right? So that child is doing that thing because of this. And now I make an assumption about what that child's intent is, what they're trying to gain, what their purpose is, what's happening in that situation. I draw conclusions from those assumptions, right? So starting right there, I'm drawing conclusions. Well, this is what's going to happen next. I adopt beliefs about the world based on that. Every time a little boy, X, Y, or Z, this is what's going to happen. And then I take actions based on those beliefs. So when I see a child in the classroom who starts to do that observable behavior, I leap to my action. This happens in a split second in the mind. This isn't something that we're consciously saying, what do I assume in this moment? This is really something that just happens at the unconscious level. But we react and we take actions based on how we've raced up this ladder of inference. And this is something that we can address. We can push ourselves to slow down, to stop that action before we take that action, and to examine, to reflect back and to examine, but what was the actual data that I observed? What is it that actually happened in that moment, rather than acting on where we've gone racing up this ladder? I hope that makes sense to you. By the way, I did not mention, please feel free to use the chat. I may not be able to capture every question or comment that comes across the chat box, but I love an active chat box. I think we all learn better when everybody's engaged. I have given this presentation and had people answering each other's questions in the chat box, which is really powerful. I am one individual here, you are many, and your experiences and your knowledge are really valuable to me and to everybody else who's here. So feel free to share, to comment, and to talk to each other in the chat box. I'll try and answer what I can and save some time at the end in case there are any big questions I've missed. All right, so we know that we are all biased, right? Bias is things that we carry that we're not aware of. Everyone, yes, you have bias. No matter how liberal and progressive minded you may think you are, there are biases that you carry about yourself, about people who are who fall within categories that you fall within, and especially about people who fall in categories where we other them, right? People who are different, who are othered to us. We carry a lot of biases about those things. I do an activity with my students where I have them write down some identity that they relate to, right? Some way that they identify. And then to say, I am, but I'm not. And the first thing that comes to mind is what they should capture, the very first thing. And it's a fascinating how people say things like, I am Christian, but I'm not closed-minded. And then realize, wow, I just said that, right? That's a bias that I'm not aware that I'm carrying. And that's about a group I belong to. So what biases might I hold about a group that I don't belong to, that I think of as other, right? If that's one that comes up for you. So it's something that you can do. Take any identity that you carry and do this activity. I'll be courageous here, vulnerable with you, and share that the first time I did this, the identity that I put down was that I was Puerto Rican, and I filled out the paper and I said, I'm Puerto Rican, but I'm not ignorant. And I just burst into tears. I just broke down because I couldn't believe that that was something that I carried in me. And I know exactly where it came from, right? I speak with no accent. I am not able, my pronouns are she and her. I would love to say she, her, ella, but I am terrified of speaking Spanish because of the way that I was raised. I was raised to pass. I was raised to hide my identity and my culture and my background, and to not allow people to know who I was. And so that was a part of my upbringing, was that you don't want to speak with an accent. What do you want people to think you're ignorant? Was something my mother, who was born in Puerto Rico, would say to me as a child, right? And that's internalized. That's something that I internalized. And here, as a 50-year-old adult, I was sitting down and commenting, I'm Puerto Rican, but I'm not ignorant. Like, that's a defensive, that's something that I carry. So these biases are in us. Those are biases, like I said. If we carry a bias as strong as that about a group we identify with and we belong to, what biases are we not conscious of? What biases are we carrying about those that we other? So this is a Rosemary Allen-ism. Aware is halfway there, right? Aware is halfway there. We have to become aware of what it is that we do and how it is that we react and where it comes from, so that we can heal, so that we can look at those past traumas, and we can begin to work to heal those injuries that we carry, right? And so that we can react differently, so that we can stop ourselves. In order to do that, we must talk about issues, right? We must talk about the issues that come up, the problems that come up. We have to acknowledge when we mess up, right? We have to acknowledge when we say or do something and catch ourselves. One of the best tools, I'm going to give you this right now. One of the best tools I have ever seen is it's a cognitive behavioral therapy tool, but it is really, really effective. And it's really just visualizing. So you take a situation that you are going into, right? I'm going to meet up with the director of this center on Wednesday. And I have, whether I want to or not, I have a picture in my mind of what that's going to go like. If I take the time to stop and visualize that, I'm meeting this director for the first time. This is what I know about this person. I know that they use the initials PJ. PJ Marks is the only thing that I know. I don't know anything about what the PJ is short for, what it stands for, anything else. I don't know anything about this person, but I'm thinking director of a center, probably a woman, probably a white woman, right? There's certain things that come to mind when I picture that situation. If I stop myself beforehand and I think through that situation and I intentionally and deliberately change the vision that I have in my mind, and I think, what if it's a male? What if it's a Black male? What if it's a young Black male? What if it's a young Black male in a wheelchair? And I just keep changing these situations. What if it's a young Black male who uses the pronouns they and them? If I have mentally thought through all these different possibilities and circumstances, when I walk in, I am less inclined to meet that young Black man and say, thank you, can you show me to the director's office? I am more inclined to say, hello, very nice to meet you. I'm Dorothy. I'm here to meet with PJ, and be introduced to that person. Does that make sense? So simply by changing our mindset, we're less likely to walk into a situation and put our foot in our mouth. We're less likely to walk into a situation and let our biases get in the way. We're less likely to just react with surprise or shock, something that would be a microaggression and might hurt that individual who has every right to be treated as important and as valuable, regardless of what we expected them to look, act, sound, introduce themselves as, right? So that's a really powerful way to begin to shift. Just doing these visualizations really can help. But we also need to talk about race. We need to become comfortable talking about race. So some of the reasons that we don't want to talk about race: we're afraid that it's politically incorrect, or that we don't know what to say, and we don't know when to say it. And we don't want to say the wrong thing to the wrong person and hurt, insult, or mess up the situation, right? So sometimes we feel like it's more comfortable, it's easier to just not say anything. So when I describe the director of that center, I'm going to say, oh, yes, PJ, he's a wonderful person. I mean, they're a wonderful person, right? So I've told you a couple of things, but I didn't tell you that he was a black male. I didn't tell you that he was young, right? Because some of those things, or that he was in a wheelchair, because some of those things are uncomfortable and we're afraid if we say them, people will think we only pay attention to race. And the fact is that it's helpful and it's important to acknowledge and recognize, but it's hard. So this is Dr. Allen's family, and her beautiful, wonderful family, and they are a wide range of ages. I'll say that they were born at different times, and I ask you, anybody want to say how you would identify anybody in this family? Be bold, take a leap, put it in the chat box. How would you name them racially? It's okay to make mistakes. There's no way you're going to get it right unless you've seen this before. Nobody? They appear to be a Black family. Oh, thank you. That's beautiful. Well, I'll tell you. Thank you, Ryden. You wouldn't know without asking them first how they choose to identify. Awesome. And they do make different choices, but I want to tell you that because they were born at different times, African American and Black family, and you've had this training before, okay. But I do want to tell you they were born at different times. So Don, her husband, on his birth certificate is colored. That's what his birth certificate says, that he's a colored male. Rosemarie is Negro. She was born about almost a decade later, right? And so they have different labels because different labels were in fashion. Her daughter Jasmine is Black, and her son Clarence is African American. So every one of them was labeled differently because there were different terms that were acceptable at different times. And at those times when they were born, this was the correct term to use. And those terms change over time. So yes, we do always want to ask, right? How do you prefer to be identified? Right? Is really helpful because sometimes your identity is invisible and sometimes we think it's visible, but we're afraid to talk about it because we're afraid we're going to say the wrong thing. What if I called Clarence Black? How would he feel about that? Right? Today, Rosemarie does not label herself as Negro. It is not a term that is used currently. She is much more comfortable to be either African American or Black when she's identified, right? And she uses them depending on the situation and how she's feeling at the time, right? And it changes. And who knows what will change in the next 10 years if these labels will go away and will be something else. Some people are very comfortable with the label BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color. And other people hate the term because it lumps all those vastly different groups of people into one category, which isn't fair and doesn't really acknowledge anyone for who they are. So it doesn't matter what the term is, someone's going to be comfortable with it and someone is not going to be comfortable with it. What you want to do is what Edie said and ask them, right? How can I identify you? How do you identify, right? Which is a comfortable way to invite people to talk about. But talking about race feels personal. We're afraid that we're going to be blamed or accused of playing the race card. I've heard Dr. Allen accused of playing the race card by colleagues who consider themselves very progressive, very liberal thinking individuals, but they don't want to be called out on something that's uncomfortable for them. And so Instead, she gets accused of pulling the race card, right? Makes people defensive. And so it feels too personal. So we don't want to talk about it. So we choose to pretend that it doesn't exist, right? That's racial etiquette, that we say anything that makes us uncomfortable, it's not polite to discuss about. But saying that we're all the same or we don't see color really fails to acknowledge the differences that people experience in their lives, right? It's really hard to be in a situation and not be acknowledged for who you are. It is really hard to be dismissed because of how you identify. It's even harder to have it ignored, as if your experience and your identity really doesn't matter in the situation, because everybody's the same. I love all my children the same. It doesn't matter their background. Martin Luther King Jr. said, want my children to be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin, which is a beautiful ideal. And when we earn that as a society, I encourage you all to go there, but we haven't earned that. Really, what we have to do is acknowledge the differences so that we can address the problems that we've created because of the differences. So I want to take a few minutes, and I'm going to ask you to get into breakout groups. I think Rachel's going to put us, maybe I'm wrong, maybe Lisa's going to put us into breakout groups. And I'm going to put you into groups of about 5. And that's a very intentional size group. Groups that are smaller than that feel very pressured, like everyone must speak. And groups too much larger than that feel a little bit too loose and it's easy to hide. I don't want you to hide, but I do want you to choose to talk and not to be forced to talk. And we're going to talk about, were you taught to be colorblind? Were you taught to not see race, to ignore race? What was your first experience with race? And how comfortable are you talking about race? And so you're just going to get into a group and just chat about this for about 10 minutes. Okay? And then we'll come back.
And hello. Excuse me, good morning. This is Rachel Hubbard with ECPAC. Everyone cross your fingers and throw that good vibe into the air. Here we go. Groups are, most of them are 5. One group is 4. So enjoy your groups and we'll see you in about 10 minutes.
Hi, I didn't get the group message or the breakout message.
Absolutely. Can you tell me who this is again?
Cynthia Garcia.
Wonderful. Cynthia, let me make sure you get into a group. Thank you for your patience. One moment, please.
Rachel, I believe at the top of the list are the people that have yet to be assigned.
Absolutely. I'm terribly sorry. Let me get people into groups right now.
It's okay.
And Rachel,
Thank you for your
this is
patience.
Margaret.
Hi, Margaret.
Hi. I just joined, so I don't know what we're doing, just so you know.
Absolutely. We're breaking out into small groups, Margaret. I'm going to give you a group and they will let you know what the prompt is. Does that feel good?
Yeah.
All right. All right. Thank you for your patience, all. Elvia, are you still on? Thank you, Dr. Chaplin, for putting that into the chat box for people to follow.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and, I sent it as a broadcast, but I didn't put it in the chat box. I think I've lost my chat box at the moment.
And let me see. Okay, can you remind me, and I'm welcome to broadcast out. I think I can do that.
Oh, here we go. No, I found it. I'll get it. I did it
Okay.
in broadcast. And I'm just gonna put it in the chat as well.
Wonderful.
So it's there.
It is truly amazing the nerves that muster up in me when I have to do breakout rooms.
Okay, hopefully everyone will see that.
And Dr. Chaplin, are you comfortable if I pause the recording for right now, as I believe it's recording our conversation, and I can just pick up when we come back from a group?
That sounds perfect.
Thank you.
All right, we'll give it a few more seconds till everybody's back. There's always one group that's deep in conversation. All right. There we go. All right, so anything interesting come up in your conversation that you'd be willing to share? Any of your groups?
I'll be willing to share something.
Thank you, Steve.
You bet. This is Stephen from New Legacy Charter School, and great group discussion. One thing I shared, which you never stop learning, I'll just say that. When we were talking, when the George Floyd riots occurred in Minneapolis and then across the country, we had a discussion about that with our staff. I'm at a school here, and I used the phrase people of color, and one staff member said, well, you can't really put everyone in the same bucket. As a Black person, how this affects me is different than somebody else who it affects. And while I knew that, it really helped me, it helped focus me a little bit. Like, you're right. There's not like a group, there's not people of color and white people. There are people all along this entire spectrum. And if you can put people on a spectrum, but you can't put all people in a box. So it truly is everyone's individual life experiences. So yes, there's similarities, but you truly need to get to know every individual person, because how this person reacted to the riots is definitely is different than somehow somebody else would have reacted, even if they might be of the same race, right? So.
Bravo, bravo. And I think what's really important about that is to recognize that, yes, we need to know every individual, and we need to know that there are groups of individuals that are impacted differently than other groups of individuals. And there's a big difference between recognizing that we can't lump everyone together and say people of color are this, or feel that, or have experienced this. We can't lump everybody together, but we also can't pretend that there aren't differences and that there aren't different experiences. We also can't ignore how those events, how the news media, how these different things impact different individuals based on their experience. And that there are groups of people whose experience may be more similar to one another's than they are to the broader population, whatever groups those are, right? What do I recommend to say instead? I think that currently BIPOC is generally acceptable, which is the Black, Indigenous, people of color and people of color. Generally, that is an acceptable group term. If you're going to use a group term, with the acknowledgement that I know that this term does not address everybody and it does not feel comfortable to everybody, but for the lack of another term, let me use this term, right? So anything that you are going to say, you know, with the lack of a better term, or know the group that you are talking to. Oh, thank you. I don't see a hand raise. I cannot see that. So don't raise your hand. Put your comment in the chat box or turn your mic on and speak to me. I can't see your
No, thank you. And I don't mean to interrupt. I just want to remind individuals, if you haven't yet, make sure you're on the proper channel after you come back from a group, if you need to be. And also, Ty Johnson, if you would like to comment, please jump in.
Yes, thank you so much, Rachel, and great day and salutations to everyone. So glad we're in this shared space together and presenting our vulnerabilities to continue to grow as a people. I love my group. I wish I could have another hour with them, and we were just getting to share each other's blood type, and it was very beautiful, and I appreciate them. One of our stories of reflection was how one of our group members took an experience that she had early on in high school and was able to use that experience later in life to ground her in her values as a parent. And that was just so profound, because most often, or at least sometimes, we don't get that luxury to ground ourselves in adverse experiences and then use them to catapult us forward as a value and to be a stronghold for our foundation, especially when we're parenting young children. And I just thought her story was remarkable. And I wanted to share that insight of how we can take those adverse situations and really utilize them to build a strong foundation for our children. Another member of our group, vulnerable as can be, shared that out of 700 students in her class, there was one Black person. And that's an uncomfortable thing to share sometimes, considering the number and considering the source of it being shared. What I found from that share out that I connected to being a person of multiple races, I found the pause in her share when she said out of 700 students, there was one Black person. And I felt in that pause and in that moment a lot of uncertainty, vulnerability, and respect. And I just thought it was so beautiful, because that was just a moment in conversation. It did not last long. We were in there for maybe 10 minutes tops. And just in that brief moment of time, because we chose to be present and introduce ourselves and share a little personal nature about ourselves, she was able to open up and be vulnerable and share in that moment. And I tell you, the more space that, you know, Dr. Dorothy and ECPAC are creating for us like this, we are becoming a stronger people because of that. And so I just wanted to share from our group our gratitude in having this time and space to really be able to reflect on these very highly charged and emotional conversations, because it's not that they're difficult. It's just that there's not enough space to have them happen with this type of intentionality. And so much gratitude. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, this is, we're gonna get back in those groups again, so hopefully you'll have a chance to talk to each other again in a little bit. But it's interesting to think about. I was in a group in a session recently, because we're all always learning, right? And the leader of that group gave us a moment to introduce ourselves. And the question that we were supposed to consider was, what is your race? And when did you find out? When and how did you find out what your race is? Which is just a really interesting, a really interesting way to approach this conversation and to think about it. Like, wow, I don't know when I learned. Like, when did I first learn of my identity? And then there were other people who were like, they knew exactly when it happened and how it happened and where they were. So it's just important that we stop and ask these questions and not be as afraid. Maybe we have a whole generation of people that, in trying to be open-minded, are maybe afraid of having these conversations, right? Maybe that's been a problem and it doesn't need to be. So there's a danger in colorblind ideology, right? So a colorblind ideology is when we believe that we don't see color, right? Or we profess that we don't see color. I prefer the term race neutral ideology, because colorblindness is actually a diagnosis, and it's kind of unfair to people like my husband who are colorblind to have to walk around with a label that's not considered a positive label, right? So it's really a race neutral ideology. And our problem is that equity issues are avoided by adopting that race neutral ideology. Say I don't see race. I see all of my children the same. I see all of my families the same. I see all the people around me the same. First of all, unless there's something wrong with your eyes, you do actually see the color of people's skin. You may not see all of their identities, but there are certain identities that we can more or less recognize. We can more or less recognize that someone's lived experience has been different from our own based on some things that we see. And to ignore that really does allow us to ignore equity issues. And it assumes that we are beyond bias, that we're beyond racism, right? I'm better than all that because I see everyone the same. But it ignores the disparities, and it ends up placing blame on the behaviors of communities of color, right? So their behaviors are problematic because we're not seeing them for who they are. So it's much easier to slip into that when we don't talk about race. So we have to talk about race, and we must talk to children about race. And this is difficult because some people, their children might be too young. Others fear that talking about race might promote racism or make them feel inferior or superior. It's really the failure to talk about race that contributes to our racial inequities. And I'm going to walk through a little bit of that. These are stages of racial awareness. Infants begin to notice and respond to skin color cues by around 6 months. They prefer the same race caregivers, right? So they recognize, this is the face that I see, this is who I'm around, and so this is who I'm comfortable with, right? And this happens very early. We know that at birth, babies look equally at faces of all races. By 3 months, they look more at the faces that match the race of their caregivers. And by 6 months, they have a preference for that, right? That happens very quickly. This is not, it's not true that babies don't see race until they're taught to see race. They see race. It's part of our human development and how we are safe in the world, that we recognize who is ours and who cares for us, and those who are like those who care for us are safe spaces. And that happens instantly in infancy because babies cannot care for themselves, right? They need those adults around them. So that affinity connection is really important. By around 9 months, there's a perceptual narrowing that starts to happen. And that's children become so focused on the race that they're most surrounded by that they lose the ability to distinguish between faces of other races, right? So when someone says they all look alike to me, it's not because they're a horrible, explicit racist individual. Well, maybe they are, but it may just be that that perceptual narrowing happened and there was never any cause for them to stretch beyond it, right? So when that perceptual narrowing starts to happen, these children, babies, become better able to distinguish faces within their own race, within the race that is raising them and caring for them, or the races that they are surrounded by, and they begin to lose that ability, just like we lose certain abilities with language. Certain of those skills are pruned. It's the same thing. That's a perceptual narrowing, that if you haven't heard and practiced a particular language sound because it's not in your language canon, then that kind of gets extinguished, and it becomes harder to learn to roll an R, for example, when you're older, if you didn't have practice with it when you were younger. This is the same thing that happens with being able to distinguish between races. So infants are born with the ability to sense a wide variety of stimuli, and as they age, they begin to selectively narrow those perceptions by categorizing them into a more socioculturally relevant way. Okay, at 9 months old, infants are able to discriminate between same race faces, but not between other race faces. Okay, they can tell subtle differences within their race. That's a natural development. So to say that this 3-year-old who thinks he's an identical twin with another 3-year-old in the classroom, even though they're different races, is beautiful and charming, and we should stop squashing that, is not really true. That child feels a deep connection to that other child. They're bonded and they love and adore each other despite their differences. And so they refer to themselves as twins, and they work to be exactly the same so that the differences between them won't matter, not because they don't see those differences. They see those differences from 9 months old, right? From 6 months old. But that lack of that perceptual narrowing happens due to a lack of exposure. So the more opportunities children have to see multiple different faces, to see people of multiple different races, to be cared for by people of multiple races, those skills don't narrow, right? They don't start to focus in on one race over the others. So experience with faces of other races slows or modifies that fine tuning so that children can be more open to more people, but it requires exposure to more people earlier. By the time children are 2 years old, they show a strong preference for those with in the same racial group. Okay, by 2 years old, they have a strong preference for their own. They see other, they see their own, and they prefer caregivers, they prefer playmates, they prefer to be around people who are of their own. They define their own by who they've been exposed to. So more exposure means that there are more people that they consider their own. Toddlers are naturally curious about physical characteristics of themselves, of other people. They want to know, they want to ask questions. They match people based on their physical characteristics. One of my favorite things that they do at this age is to say, "You're my friend." And you say, "Well, which friend?" And they say, "Well, the blue one or the black one." That they're talking about the color of the child's shirt because they have already learned that it's not okay to talk about the color of the child's skin. Where it would be a lot easier to understand who they were talking about if they said the child whose skin is dark brown and the child whose skin looks just like mine right? If they could name those things more readily, it would be easier to figure out who they were talking about than when they say the black kid, the black one. He sits next to the blue one. Well, those are the colors of shirts they were wearing today. If you haven't heard a child do this, I don't know. Maybe they're a little bit older than toddlers. So talking to, let's see if I can find this. Talking to infants and toddlers about race. It's really a matter of looking at everything around your children. Look in the environment. Make sure that diversity is well represented by people, by books, by photos, right? Expose young children to all different kinds of people and faces and looks and clothing and hairstyles and all of those different things. Do you have staff members and other professionals that you engage with from different racial groups? Are there opportunities for children to be exposed to different people? We need to model the positive ways to talk about skin color and differences. Jessie has dark skin and you have light skin. Both skin colors are so beautiful, right? That's a simple conversation. We are not saying this one is better or worse. We're saying these are all beautiful. But we're naming that. We're naming what that is. Preschoolers match people according to racial physical characteristics and groups, but they're also confused about the complexities of different group categories, as we all are, right? It's not clear. But they pick up societal stereotypes from people around them, from media, from cartoons, from PBS. It's everywhere, right? And so they might show discomfort, they might show fear, they might tease and refuse to play with others because of language differences, because of skin color, because of physical disabilities, right? This is a normal, natural thing. By the age of 3, so preschool age, by the age of 3, children are no longer, look at how fast that happens, they're no longer preferring those of their own race. They are preferring those of whatever race, identity, society has labeled as best. They've already internalized, this is what I see, this is what I hear. And so they choose their friends, they choose who they want to be around based on those things, right? We know the doll study where children would say they would rather play with the white doll than the brown doll. They pick this doll over that doll. Which doll is worse? Which doll is nicer? Which doll is meaner? Regardless of whether the doll looks like them, they still preferred the white doll. That's in our society. This happens across the world in other societies where when we know what caste people are in India, we choose who we want to play with based on what's society's preference, right? At a very young age, between 3 and 5, this is when this is happening. Those are preschoolers. So we need to talk to preschoolers about race. We need to help promote racial identity in a positive way so that children are less likely to internalize racial discrimination. They pick it up from us. Our unchecked biases are biases that we are not aware of, that they are surrounded by, they catch on to. That's what they're made for. They absorb everything in their environments. So we need to choose books that promote diversity, that highlight positive role models. That doesn't mean that our books are all hero books, right? Regular children, regular people doing regular things that are positive need to be in front of our children from multiple different races. We need to emphasize the importance of being different and celebrate differences. No one looks the same. Each person has their own look. It would be so boring if everyone looked the same. It's a simple conversation. Yes, that Band-Aid matches your skin. That Band-Aid doesn't match my skin. I wish I could find a Band-Aid that did match my skin. That would be, I'm going to use this clear one because it comes the closest. I have to tell you, I put multiracial Band-Aids in our college classroom on the care station for my students. Dr. Allen walked in the classroom and screamed that she was so excited she had never seen a Band-Aid that matched her skin tone before. So, this is a woman who was close to 60 at the time, right? These are important little things that we can do for children that inspire that conversation without being harmful. We need to stress how everyone is different and everyone is important, and no one is better than anyone else. No one is better than anyone, no matter what color our skin is. We are all important. We need to talk about how we want to treat other people and the way we want to be treated, right? We treat everyone fairly. We try to make sure everyone in the class gets what they need. We want to make sure that we're promoting empathy and not sympathy. It's important that white children don't feel sorry for children of color, because those are the superior attitudes that we don't want developed. We can say we all have different skin color, we're all the same, we have families, we all eat food, right? It's alike and different. By kindergarten, that's the core of kindergarten learning, right? What's the same and what's different? We like to play, but it's not okay to treat someone differently because of their skin. We have to be aware of when that happens. Who is it who leads play in a group? Who is it who takes charge? Who is it who decides who gets to be the mom and who gets to be the cat today, right? Who is it who is taking charge of those things? And just be aware that those societies' differences really, really make a difference. If we don't talk about race, they create their own reality based on their own very limited knowledge, right? The logic of 3-year-olds is developing and it's flawed, and they leap to conclusions that we would never in our conscious mind leap to. And it's because that's what they have. No one's talking to them about it. No one's telling them what to think. And so they're thinking what makes sense to them. They form their understanding with little guidance from parents or from other adults. And they naturally categorize people. That's okay. We have to have the conversations about it. And they watch adults. They watch all kinds of media that we think may be harmless, right? But they know what that bear in that book is standing in for. And they know what, in that cartoon, they know who's representing what. Those people may look purple, but there's a certain way that they're behaving. They know that the hyenas in the Lion King have a certain way of talking and behaving, and those hyenas are representing something that no one's talking about. And children draw conclusions based on those things. This bias is learned very early. I'm going to show you a video, a short video clip. It's really short. Hopefully you can hear it. Oh dear. I hope that you can hear it. Let me try. I'm going to stop this share for a second and make sure that I have the right box checked again so that this doesn't happen. Where'd you go? Sorry about this. I'm going to, nope, that's not what I want to do. I have to remember how I do it. It should be, sorry, it should be when I share screen. So let me try that again. Zoom. There we go, optimize for video clip. Okay. There we go. All right, now I'm going to show you this video. You have to listen closely. They have accents. It may be hard to make out everything that that they hear. Yes, who's in focus in the pictures? Yeah, the photos that we choose are interesting. All right, I'm going to play this video, and I want you to listen as best you can all the way through.
Where are they gone?
I don't know.
You don't know. So who ate them all?
Someone come round and they just ate them all.
Someone come around and ate the cakes.
Yeah.
So someone broke into a home and ate Mr. Kipling's Angel Slices. Didn't take the TV, didn't take, some jewellery. They took these cakes.
And it was a black man.
Oh my God!
Now, I want to give credit and say that the mom laughs, not because this is funny, it is not funny. The mom laughs because she's shocked. This is not a mom who has explicitly taught her child these biases. This is not a mom who has told her child how to see the world. This is a mom who is shocked, dumbfounded that this is what her child is saying. That child is what, 3 years old? And that's the leap. I'm trying to get away with something. I'm trying to lie about something. I've made this leap to say it's someone who broke into our house. And now I'm going to say it's someone who is Black. A Black man did it. That child learned that from somewhere, right? They can't avoid it. It's around them anywhere. If you've ever tried to raise a child in a religion that's not Christian in our society, it is impossible to have your child avoid Christmas. In the month of December, well, sometimes as early as October, but at least in the month of December, there's nowhere that you can go and nothing that you can do and nothing your child can see, hear, or be exposed to that isn't going to expose them to the idea of Christmas and Santa, right? You cannot insulate your child from that. You cannot protect them from that. It's society, right? And those things are around us. And so that exposure happens and children learn different things and they internalize different things, okay? Yes, thank you, Madonna. I appreciate your thought, right? She says, I hope I don't come across as rude, and thank you for being courageous. But is it possible that sometimes a cartoon is just a cartoon? Yes, I'm not trying to say that the people who make the cartoons or make the media are deliberately and intentionally going out of their way to affect our society and to mind control our children, but it does happen. And maybe the first step was who they cast to play those voices and how they played those voices. And so those Lion King characters that are not positive characters, that live in a terrible place and ruin a place when they come to it, right? There's a lot of our society that's embedded in these mythological cartoons and movies and things that we see. Not because Disney is going out of its way to try and brainwash our children, but because it's so around us. We're so swimming in these biases everywhere that they come through, they come across in other things. And somehow this child got the message that that would be an acceptable lie, that would be believable, that someone broke into the house, especially if she said that it was a Black man, right? So, we live surrounded by these things. So do the people who write news media, right? And who post clips online with pictures of people during Katrina. There's a famous, the same day, 2 different photos of people swimming through water with bags of food. And one of them said, Black man wades through chest deep water after looting a store. And the other picture, 2 white males, I think it was 2 males, it says, people found food in grocery stores. So people found food. The Black man looted the grocery store. It was the choice of words for the headlines. Again, not because somebody sat down and said, haha, I'm going to affect everyone's thinking about these things, because they mindlessly typed in what came to mind. And what came to mind is generations of this kind of poisonous bias. And that's what comes across. And so then we read it. And if we're not critically thinking about it, if we're not analyzing what's in front of us, we are just exposed. We just see it as a cartoon and we don't think that we're making inferences about it. But 3-year-olds are made to make those inferences and draw those conclusions. That's what they're built for. So it's our job then to help them see other possibilities, right? To see things maybe in another way. Right? So we want to limit children's exposure to stereotypes. I'm not saying they can't watch The Lion King, but maybe we can point out, oh, why is it that those people sound like so-and-so? And those people, like those animals, right? We can have that conversation with our children and cause them to think about it. We can ensure that they have a diverse social environment. And we can create more diversity through our books, our toys, our arts, the things that we show them, the things that we see, and the things that we talk about in the things that we see. So we're going to totally run out of time. I really did want to put you into these groups to talk about children and race and what comes up for you. And when you come back, I'm going to jump to some strategies that I can share with you. So we're going to make this a little bit shorter, maybe 8 minutes, because hopefully you're going to be able to get into those breakout groups really quick. So I want you to think about what came up for you, right? I thank you, Madonna, for sharing in the whole group, but maybe in the small groups, it will be easier for more people to just chat a little bit in your same groups about what comes up and maybe some strategies that you can use. Are you ready, Rachel? Rachel, I'm going to pause recording while you finish those breakout groups. All right, so hopefully that was some really rich conversation. These are not easy topics for all of us to talk about. For some of us, they are an opportunity we're grateful for because we maybe haven't had a lot of opportunity to have these conversations in mixed groups before. And for a lot of us, this is really hard because these are conversations no one's asked us to think through before. So I appreciate you taking the time to visit and chat. There we go, with one another. It takes me a minute to get my screen set back up. So I want to talk about a culture blind ideology. And the difference is that culture is something everyone has, right? So it's something that we all have, right? So many of us are raised. Yes, we will share the slides. Many of us are raised to believe that we don't have a race. Race is something that other people have, when indeed we all do. But culture is also something that everyone has, and we need to learn and recognize the culture that we bring, right? So if we're working with young children, with families, we know that every home has its own culture. Every family has its own culture. White people don't always recognize that they have a culture, right? When I ask, often when I ask people to identify their race or their culture or their background, they might talk about their ancestry, right? I had 23andMe done, and so I know I have 0.9% of Native American in me, which is not the same as your culture, right? Culture is really not something that others have because they're different than ours. It's really something that's so internalized. It's so a part of us. It's how we were raised and it's what we believe in. So the cultural background that we bring with us is all of our beliefs and perceptions about the world, about people, about how things work. They come from somewhere. That is our culture. Maybe it's the culture we were raised with in our household. Maybe it's the culture we were raised with in our church. Maybe it's the culture that we were surrounded with, that we chose to leave home and surround ourselves with a culture that was different, right? But those beliefs and perceptions are ingrained in us. It's also our personal identities, who we are and how we are in the world, and our cultural practices, right? And that doesn't mean anything major. It doesn't necessarily mean anything elaborate, right? We might think that A cultural practice is something that only some people have because they have a rich culture, and so they practice these particular religious beliefs or different things. But it's not necessarily, we all have cultural practices, whether it's um, whether it's a cookie share. That was one that happened in my classroom in December. I had families that came to me and said, we don't have a culture. You're sharing, all these families are sharing their different cultures about Kwanzaa and about Hanukkah, and we don't have anything. But they really believed that they didn't have anything. When I asked them, what's something that you practice that's a part of your practice year after year, that's not religious, right? We didn't teach religion in our classroom. We just exposed them to different cultural practices. And families came in and they said, well, we do a cookie share every year. Can we do that? Can we do a cookie trade? And is that cultural? Like, sure, if that's a part of your community and what you were raised with, that's absolutely something that you bring. So some of these are more superficial. So this is a culture tree. Maybe you've seen there's an iceberg, a culture iceberg. I hate that image because it's cold and distant, very literally cold and distant, and very hard to relate to. For me, a tree is easier for me to relate to. I'm an old hippie in that way. A tree is living, right? It's a living thing. And we understand that the branches, the leaves change and they fall off and they go away. Those are easy to change things, right? It doesn't change who the tree is, but those are simple things. So those are really superficial cultural things like dress and music and food. I can learn to eat different foods. I can learn to dress differently. It doesn't change who I am at my core. It's more like the leaves of the tree. And then there's the trunk. And these are more hidden rules that we don't always talk about. Concepts of time can run very deep. Personal space, right? Close talkers and people who need a bigger bubble around them. Rules of how to behave, right? Who respects who and why. Those are deeper cultural rules that run our lives, right? Facial expressions, nonverbal communication. I talk with my hands a lot, right? Those are things that are harder to change, right? I can sit on my hands, but it's harder to change about who I am. And the roots are truly the unseen cultural pieces, right? These are things that we don't really talk about much. They're much, much deeper values. They're judgments that we carry. And sometimes they're connected to some of those hidden rules. Tone of voice, right? You've ever been in a classroom with a teacher who's a loud talker? She's a loud talker, right? That's who she is and how she is in the world. That's a very, very hard thing to change. And it's very hard for us to change our attitudes about someone because our attitudes about those behaviors are so deep and so deeply rooted in our culture. Not in our heritage, not in where our great-great-grandparents immigrated here from. It's really in our culture, how we believe about the world, right? So time is a really big one. There's some of you who were on time early, right? Showed up early, ready to log into this. There are others of you who are precise time people who were like, there's 3 more minutes. I can answer this one more email before I log in. Right? They show up precisely on time. And then there are other people that are like, they're just going to do introductions in the beginning. I can show up a couple minutes late and it'll be fine, right? We have all those the people that are coming a few minutes late might really be frustrating to the people who came a few minutes early, right? And that's because of our judgments, those deep-rooted beliefs about what time means, right? And what that means to us and what it tells us about a person, when really that's cultural, right? And it comes from things that we don't necessarily control or change easily. And these cultural disconnects can really show up when we're working with children. We know that most children don't come to school knowing what the teachers expect them to do. Most teachers are not aware of the cultural expectations of that child at home, right? How does that child eat, dress, feed? All of those things are different in different homes, and they're very attached to culture. So it could be the child's first experience outside of a home or with someone other than their family. There may be difference in their expectations of children's behavior. What we have to be aware of, oh man, this is just too much. I'm looking at the time. What we have to be aware of is creating a white space. And when we create a white space, when we make schools, when we make programs, when we make communities into white spaces, they really are difficult and challenging for people who don't carry those same values and traditions, whose deep roots that are very difficult to change, whose trunk is very difficult to change, have a hard time fitting in. And white spaces are spaces that are perceived to be off limits to people of color. And people of color experience acute disrespect. And again, there's that term, people of color. It's a generic, it's broad, everybody's individual. But using that term and thinking about the disrespect that people are reminded in white spaces that they don't belong there. I have another video. I hope you can hear it.
Taking my picture. I really don't care.
Okay.
Because you don't belong in this development.
Yeah. Okay.
What's your name?
Live here. I'm not telling you.
I live here.
Okay, where do you live?
Why would we tell you any of this?
Where do you live? Where do you live? Okay, not a problem. I'm gonna call the gate and have you all arrested.
Okay.
You do not deserve to be in here.
Okay.
Taking my picture. I
Okay.
really don't care.
So you hear that language, right? He says, you don't deserve to be in here. I really don't care what you think. You don't belong here. You have to tell me your name. You have to tell me your address. These are young girls walking home from school in their own neighborhood, right? Yeah, it's horrible. It's horrible and it's distressing. And I'm going to call the gate and I'm going to have you gotten rid of because you don't deserve to be here. Right? That's a white space. And there are communities, gated communities, that truly people live there thinking that they're protected and they're safe from other, whatever they've defined as other. And therefore the space belongs to them and other is not allowed in this space. This happens all over the place all the time. You know, people who have been arrested for or harassed by the police at least for jogging in their own neighborhood because their skin doesn't look like they belong in that neighborhood, right? So we have to be aware that our environments with young children can easily become white spaces. When we switch to saying, well, there are school rules and everybody has to learn how to live by those school rules, right? There are certain ways that you have to be in school, is what we're saying, that there are white space rules that you have to conform to, that you have to mask, that you have to code switch, that you have to subject yourself to in order to be deserving of this space. And this happens to historically marginalized people, right? And they are experiencing this over-policing, this acute disrespect. They're constantly reminded they don't really belong, right? Why are you here? What does this look like in early childhood? Mispronouncing children's names, changing children's names, giving them a nickname because it's too difficult for us to remember and we haven't bothered to practice, right? That's a form of, this is a white space. So I'm gonna give you an Americanized name. And the excuse that, well, I asked and the family said it was fine, we're not taking into account power differentials, right? Look at the power that that teacher or that leader or that person who's coming into your home says, oh, you know, it's really hard for me to pronounce Asafiawe correctly and remember it. Is it okay if I just call her Rose? Right? I really love that name and that's really sweet. There isn't a parent or a child out there that's going to say no. They're going to say, oh, okay, yes. And they'll go by that name. I have college students who have allowed professors to change their name because it was too difficult for them to say, right? This is a form of policing. This is a form of white space where we say our way is better. Assuming that a Spanish-speaking child might be undocumented or that family that doesn't speak English isn't as intelligent because they have accents. Assuming students only eat stereotypical ethnic foods, right? And we're not going to offer them anything else, or, well, you know, we're going to act this and we're going to dress up and play this because you only eat these foods, right? Favoring one group of children over other groups. This happens, right? This happens. call on some children and ignore others, and not even be aware that it's based on race, or that it's based on gender, or that it's based on class, right? I know who's going to have the answer. And so that's who I'm going to call on. This happens in schools all the time. We do this with young children, assigning roles based on gender or race, right? So the boys are going to do this and the girls are going to do that. Allowing children to do that to one another, right? Who takes charge and who leads the play, and how do they assign roles? And where did they learn it from, right? Misinterpreting children's actions or ways of being as defiant, right? Just because that child doesn't make eye contact the way you want them to make eye contact. You know, in some cultures, that when you're in trouble and you're being reprimanded, you are never to look an adult in the eye who's correcting you. You look at the floor and accept that berating from your family, from your grandmother, from whoever it is who's telling you what you've done wrong. Now, in a classroom, as a teacher, I'm telling a child, you look at me when I'm talking to you. That's cultural. That's something I was raised with, that you look at me when I'm talking to you. It may not be what's that child was raised at, but for me to leap, to go up that ladder of inference and to assume that that child is being defiant without acknowledging that maybe I'm just misinterpreting a cultural response is a part of what happens that makes our classrooms into not classroom spaces, not safe spaces, but white spaces. So we need to develop this cultural humility, right? We want to be the student, to always be learning about those who we interact with personally within a cultural context, and suspending our judgment. There's a fourth grade teacher in Denver who did this activity. Maybe you've seen this. She asked her students to write, I wish my teacher knew, right? Was what they were asked to write. I want to stop and read Myra's. I hope I said that right. Children choosing materials only with pink and purple, and a boy given the choice between blue and black. Well, walk into a Target store and go shopping down the boys aisle and the girls aisle, right? We are definitely giving them gendered choices, right? Changing name, cutting hair, absolutely. Yep, Native Americans were subjected to a lot in those camps. And we do that in schools, right? We have rules about hair and caps. Look, I could go on with stories for hours of things that I've seen happen, right? No hats allowed in school. So you have to take that cap off that you're wearing to hide the fact that your mother only got partway through your cornrows, and the other side of your hair is just what was left after taking out your extensions. Right? So a child comes to school with a cap on her head to make sure that no one sees what's going on. And a teacher says, sorry, it's a school rule, all hats off. That's a white space rule with no acknowledgement and no understanding of why there might be a reason for someone to do something differently. So this teacher did this activity. I wish my teacher knew I don't have a friend to play with me. I wish my teacher knew sometimes my reading log is not signed because my mom is not around a lot. I wish my teacher knew I don't have pencils at home to do my homework. I wish my teacher knew how much I miss my dad because he got deported to Mexico when I was 3 years old and I haven't seen him in 6 years. Right? So cultural humility is about developing the practice of not knowing, of just not having the answer, not being the expert, not knowing what's right for someone at all times. This is hard for people who work with young children. We think we're the adults and we're supposed to know, and we're supposed to inform them, and we're supposed to tell them. And just stepping into that, what is it that you wish I knew? What is it that you wish to tell me that I haven't made space for? And this is a really good question. What do your team members wish you knew? Have you stopped to ask, what do these other people that I work with wish I knew about them and about how they work and how they function in the world and anything else? So how to be anti-racist. So the essence of anti-racism is an action. It is action that follows the emotional and the intellectual awareness of racism. So if this work that we've done today has made you think about something, has made you feel about something differently, truly stepping into an anti-racist space is to act on that new awareness. Yes, go read a book. Yes, talk to someone that you love and trust about the things that you've learned, but what will we do to take action, right? So racism is not neutral. You are either racist or you are anti-racist. Allowing racism to exist, to persist, is a form of racism. Confronting racial inequities is being anti-racist. There's no such thing as non-racist. You cannot stand neutral in a world, in a society that is not neutral, right? That these things happen, that gentleman felt he, and I use that term gentleman loosely, that he felt he had a right to challenge these girls, to ask them their names and their addresses. Really, would those questions be appropriate if those little girls were white? Clearly, that gentleman would not have made those same questions, right? But he felt he had the right to do that. This is a society that has these racist forms are built in, and we're surrounded by them. So you can't be anti-racist, right? The only way to undo racism is to identify it, describe it, and dismantle it. We have to take action. When we fail to see race, we fail to see racism. And that creates that passive racist. That's where we have that problem. A racist is not who you are. It is what you do or what you fail to do. So the charge from this work today is, if you've been caused to think differently about any of these situations, you are also called to act and to move in a direction where you support and promote anti-racist behaviors and actions and policies through direct action or inaction. Because not doing that is what defines us as being racist. Someone who supports, promotes anti-racist behaviors, actions, policies through direct action is an anti-racist, right? So racism is the behaviors, policies, ideas, and actions that result in, sustain, and normalize racial inequities, that unfairness. So we need to deprogram. We need to retrain our brains. We need to accept and expect that this is going to be uncomfortable, that we're going to be asked to think about things we haven't had to think about, because other people live every day thinking about those things, right? And that's not a fair society. If I have to go through life every day thinking about these things, right, that those little girls had to know to grab their phone and videotape that situation to help keep themselves safe, then it's important that the other little girls walking home in that same neighborhood are aware that this is happening, that this is a problem. We have to be intentional in expanding our reality. We need to seek opportunities to positively interact with people in other racial groups. One of the quickest, easiest ways that you can do this is go through your Facebook, your Instagram, your LinkedIn, any of your social media accounts, and look at who you are friends with. It's very easy to follow on Twitter a whole bunch of people that you don't necessarily know, but that might expose you to something else. Right? It's a simple way to step into, how do I learn more about how other people think and feel? You're going to see things, you're going to hear things that shock, that dumbfound, that upset you, that distress you. But if you go into it knowing this is my opportunity to learn, right? That I am choosing cultural humility, that position of not knowing and not being aware, and I want to learn more, you have opportunities to learn something, to go and check Urban Dictionary and find out, what does that term even mean that I'm missing out on, right? And find out, not because you should start using those terms, but because it's an opportunity for you to learn something new. Get involved with social groups that are diverse, right? Stretch outside of the people that you're typically exposed to for an opportunity to meet and learn about others. Share your non-biased anti-racist beliefs with anyone in your network. Talk about it. And we need to stand up to biased, racist individuals, not just get incensed when a gentleman says something, but to step out of our house and say, this is not okay. You get in your car and leave this neighborhood. Those girls are entitled to walk this street just as much as you are, right? We need to work to make the implicit explicit, because it's the only way that we can truly address it and grow and change. And that's all I have. And I'm just in time for any questions. Yes, don't forget to do your evaluation because there's prizes, right? You will get books for having participated. I thank you all very much for being here, for attending, for listening to me, for accepting me when you were expecting someone else. I will going to put my contact information. You can reach me through the Center for Excellence and Equity through Dr. Allen. Sorry, I can't type and talk at the same time. And here's my email contact if you have any questions or anything that you want to share directly with me.
Well, thank you everyone for attending. I hope, as Dr. Shepard said, that this got you thinking, got you feeling, and potentially, hopefully leading to some new action in creating an anti-racist environment where you work and where you serve very diverse cultures every day to make sure that our spaces are not white spaces, but are welcoming and honor everybody's lived experiences and culture. So thanks for coming, everyone. Wish you the best in your next adventures around this work, and hopefully we'll see you again. I'm sure we probably will. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.